solutions to systemic problems and talking about the principles of the just third way, how we can apply them to global problems, including poverty, racism, or an environmental destruction. And with that, I'll turn it over to Norm.
Okay, thank you. You know, today I read the Washington Post in their editorial section by an article by Fareed Zakaria. The dollar is our superpower, and Russia and China are threatening it. And it goes on to point out that the share of the dollar in global central bank reserves has dropped from roughly 70% 20 years ago to less than 60% today, and it's falling steadily. And it goes on to talk about that. But as you read the article, you wonder, what are they talking about? And what is wrong with the dollar today if it's going to succeed to help bring together to address poverty throughout the world, racism, war, environmental destruction? And that's what today we want to be talking about. So I think if any of you could go to that article, I think it's very, very important, because we need people who will write in to point out what's missing in their understanding of money. It's not just the writers, but it's the Federal Reserve. What is money? And we're going to be looking at that as a fundamental tool, social tool, equivalent to what the ballot does for politics. Money will do for democratizing economic power. So that's what our discussion will be today. So I begin. I also turn to our CESJ core values, and one of it says, people create tools shaped from the resources and energies of nature to support the economic and social sovereignty of the person. Through private property ownership, each person can become master of the technology needed to realize his or her fullest human potential and dignity. The next one says, people also, this is coming from our core values, people also create and maintain social institutions as highly specialized, invisible tools designed to serve highly specialized social functions within a just social order. Institutions as organized expressions of society's values and goals largely determine the quality of each person's individual and social life as historical creations of humanity, carrying within themselves the wounds of history. This was Father Fareed. Institutions are continually in need of healing and perfecting. And that's what we're trying to do, is how do we perfect our institution? And the one that we focus on today, and I think we have to focus on in terms of building a new world, is money. And the specific one that we should be addressing is, because of its influence throughout the world, is to be able to offer the Economic Democracy Act as a way to reconstruct the US and eventually global money systems. And of course, with all the students coming from Biafra and having suffered what they had to go through in Nigeria, this also becomes a way in which, for example, you could have a regional central bank which creates the right kind of money in order to further and build a foundation for fundamental human rights and power for every person. Now, in the,
Would you like me to bring up the graphics?
I will go.
Oh, you- okay.
Yeah. I also like to look at things we have on our website, and which it started with the preamble of the Constitution of the United States. Says we, the people, and we should be thinking about this, we, the people of the world, in order to form a more perfect union, and the next words, establish justice. And now I like to use a quote from one of the great thinkers of the world. While I talk about Louis Kelso as my most important teacher, Buckminster Fuller, or Bucky Fuller, they called him, had this to say, because I think he's a giant. He says, our challenge is to make the world work for 100% of humanity in the shortest possible time through spontaneous cooperation without ecological offense or the disadvantage of anyone. I don't know how you can say anything beyond that as a great thought of how you unify the world. And then Louis Kelso in his writings talked about property. And I think it's always important to be able to define, because most people think of, as I did before going to law school, I thought of property as the things you own. You see, no, Kelso said, no, it isn't the thing you own, it's the power that you have. Power that you have over the things you own, and then he said he said also it's the fruits or profits from what you own. That is whatever is going to be produced from the land or technological development that's constantly evolving, as Bucky points out. That's very key. So you want to look at a property as always, you want to look at it in terms of what are the fruits, and that's what we want to get to the poorest human being in the world without taking property away from the richest person in the world. They can't take their property with them, so we can talk about what happens after they die, to encourage that they spread it out as broadly as possible. And that's where the Economic Democracy Act occurs. But I like this by Kelso. The money is not a part of the visible sector of the economy. People do not consume money. Money is rather a yardstick for measuring economic input, economic outtake, and the relative values of the real goods and services of the economic world. Everyone could participate, and that's what Kelso was saying. And then Buckminster Fuller offers some language which I love in terms of saying, you know, what do you mean by the yardstick? Is it going to be gold? Well, that's, or is there a more, is there a measure of value that would be more consistent with the evolving technology and technological capacity of humanity, much of it in the United States, but throughout the world? So how do we connect up to that? And I'm gonna quote a few things. You know, Bucky was saying war is obsolete, and I agree. Even despite my work in the Korean War, because it was supposed to be a war of the United Nations. It wasn't the United States, but it was supposed to be a Korean War. So I could be in that. But then when it came to the Vietnam War, I resigned my commission as captain and I wouldn't fight in a war that I didn't believe in. So we're looking at ideas, I like certain things by Bucky. He says this is very, very interesting. I want to get the quote, but it's okay. But anyway, Bucky says it's the price of a kilowatt hour. Now, there are people who say you shouldn't use that, but I have yet to hear anyone tell me why not, when we know how important electricity is in terms of the evolving technology, which is displacing that of the wage system. It used to be the labor, everything is labor. No, that's not true. We may be able to provide work if under the Economic Democracy Act, people would get incomes from ownership, from profits of technological advance, and be able to do the work that they would love to do, even if they got no money for it, because they would get their money as owners from the profits of the corporations that produce things, because corporations would be expected that all future development they would finance, and these are trillions of dollars in the United States. For example, it was, in recent years, it was 4 trillion. It could be twice that much. It could be 10 trillion. And you have to think about it in terms of the world, that we could be bringing these technologies, but all of them are like robots, artificial intelligence. They are not human forms of work, but they are definitely there producing what humans used to do in order to produce more and better things for people to consume, but to consume without having to depend on government poverty programs, which I was involved in, but that keeps people weak rather than strong. So ownership would give people, we could have a democratic world. Now, this is very interesting. There was a book. It was called The Second American Revolution, and the author was John D. Rockefeller III. And this was published back in 1973, and he talks about Louis Kelso and Louis Kelso's vision for a new world, and he was very supportive. This is one of the Rockefeller in that family, but the book, The Second American Revolution, indicated what we should be doing. But unfortunately, when we look at the political parties of today, the Democrats and Republican parties, or the parties throughout Europe, and the parties, certainly most of the politicians throughout Africa and certainly in Russia and China, the people, we want to get our message to the people so that they wake up, and this program, what we talk about, will be their ideas, and the politicians will have to, they will have, in order to get the vote, if in fact they make that available, they will have to be able to satisfy the people. I think people want power themselves. They don't want to be thrown around and pushed around by people with concentrated power, because we know power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely, said some of the giants. So anyway, now we want to get into some of the programs that we can talk about now. I want to go on first. Okay. Okay, we're looking at, for class 9, systemic solutions to systemic problems. And that's what today, and we're looking at, let's look at 4 problems: poverty, racism, war, and that includes all forms of violence, and environmental destruction. And then we can look at how in the past corporate ownership was. 10% in America owned 90% of today's corporate ownership. Shares, and the shares give people power to be governing. It's like the ballot. The number of shares they have will determine how much they have over policy of the corporate sector. So we want to make the corporate sector more democratic. But then you look and see, oh, the 90% of people in America own 10% of the pie, and most of the poor own nothing at all. They're depending on the politicians to provide them welfare. And I'm not against welfare. I just think it can be gradually faded out. So we want to look at the future. On the right, we see that we're not taking anything away from the 10%, but we're also giving them what the 90% will have. So in the future, by controlling the money system and having the people control, just as they control who through the vote, the political system, to the extent they have real power, this is more important because this is every day. By controlling the money power, the central banks, in America, the 12 Federal Reserve regional banks, each regional bank should be, the leaders should all be appointed by the people themselves, not by the politicians. And the same thing goes for the central bank of the country, and the same thing would go once you go to the global level. And that I think can all take place within a 10-year period. I think we have to move as quickly as possible, but that means we need that new paradigm to be understood. And the real problem of the paradigm is that academia does not teach this. And that's why we're forming a Justice University, and we will now try to get money so that Justice University can attract the finest thinkers in the country, but also have those who are together now to be those who begin to influence the thinking of academia. So now we want to move from the welfare system, the wage and welfare system, to the ownership system. As you can see on the left, the present system increases human alienation and it decreases dignity. And what we're trying to do is shift so that the so-called leaders are at the bottom and the customers are the citizens through an ownership sharing system which increases human dignity and decreases alienation. Now, the challenge, what could unite us all? And so we see on the left, it's a conflict system. And the conflict system not only results in people killing each other, but it's war. And we want to move to the ownership participation system. That will be the end of war. Who wants to go to war if everyone can have an equal opportunity to be an owner? So the just third way framework is necessary for addressing the systemic problems. Now let's now get down to the 1, 2, 3, 4. Really, the moral basis of the just third way gets down to each human person making sure that they have dignity and power. And then this writing at the time of what was
Adam Smith.
Adam Smith was Jean-Baptiste Say, and he said something, and the Marxists and the capitalists never listened to him. And he said there can be an equilibrium under the binary. He was talking about before talking about Kelso and how you get there, but he said that aggregate supply or production should equal aggregate demand, consumption. You only produce for consumption. But if people produce more than they can consume, then it gets into savings. And the present system allows those savings to be the control over the future. And we're going to change that, as you will see. So we're looking at how to get an equality between supply, aggregate supply, all production, aggregate demand, consumption. So this is where two basic points are made. And we want to democratize. How? Democratizing access to insured capital credit. And how do you do that? You have to, if you have credit from banks, you have to repay it. But instead of past savings, this is very important. It's taught past savings. The economists teach past savings, and you find, but we're saying no. Kelso said future saving, and that's the key to the democratization of ownership. And if you want to look at it in terms of the system, three principles. From economic justice, you have your inputs from capital and labor, income to capital through profits, and income to wages. But then you know that all systems have flaws. So then you look at social justice. What is social justice? When you discover that there's something wrong with the system, that the principle, they violate the principles, that's where people power comes together. You change it, not expecting the leaders who have power to bring about change, but rather the people. And this is what the civil rights movement was able to do. They came together and they were attempting to change the system. When it came to politics, when it came to getting voting rights and ending segregation laws, they succeeded, but they didn't have an economic agenda. They did not have one other than either capitalism, which most of them did not have, or most of them were looking for socialism or communism as the economic system. And that does not unite everybody. So we can now look at, for a free and just economy, there are four pillars. Expanded capital ownership, that's important. You want to limit the economic power of the state, and you do it through private property and also free and open markets. That's pretty simple once you know what they are. And then you can see that their goals are to decentralize power, economic power. And we look at the way to change the economic system. Justice University as a new university for the world. And so that all universities start teaching the just third way. That's the new paradigm, the new money system, so that children will begin to learn. Once you have academia teaching it through the high schools, and then teachers seeing that their income and now they ask for shares of stock to be for their retirement. No, but it should be in this form, that teachers should be able to get an equal allocation of credit so that they and all other citizens, and they begin to teach ownership as we're covering today. And then in the political, you want to change politics and government. Okay, again, education will do it. How? Money and credit is essential, and also the tax system. We want to have a tax system in which corporate taxes could be eliminated if the corporations pay out all their profits as dividends. You see, and they would be tax deductible. There'd be no corporate tax, and everything would come out of individual taxation, except for those who are non-owners today, who get bank loans repayable with future savings. They'd be interest-free. There'd be a small charge to ensure that the shares that they're buying are what's called viable shares, or legitimate, that is well-managed, shares from well-managed, successful corporations, not people who are just trying to learn how to get started. No, but you'd have to have good management, and whatever workers are there are going to have to be well-trained. And we want to change the union system, of course, so that instead of just looking at labor unions, we're talking about going beyond that the union should be organizing ownership unions. What we're talking about, reaching all families in the government to learn about the just third way. The tax system, as I say, that whatever the government should not be doing what it's doing today, and that is getting money from the Fed that has no backing at all, which is the equivalent of counterfeiting. It's just printing money, but it has no backing. There's no tax money behind it. It may take a dozen years or 20 years to the debt. And so we're looking at technology is very important. And then we, is that the last one? Okay. Oh, no. Okay. And then we look at the vehicles. The ESOP, we've already gotten the laws. Kelso invented the ESOP, and because of some women, we were able to get the law passed. There was a woman from Harlem, Ennis Francis, who heard a talk right after King was assassinated, and she didn't even have a high school degree, but she was one of the leaders in the Central Harlem Council of Neighborhood Board. She was like a queen in Harlem, and she heard a talk. I happened to give the talk, and she became an advocate. And as a result of that, when I was having trouble getting to top people in the Congress with the laws to make all workers into ownership, and Kelso had already adopted this, even though it wasn't in the law, but he found ways to create the first employee stock ownership plans. And so because we found a senator who was supportive later, but it was only because she was able to get to the Charlie and Pillsbury and his father, who were very wealthy people, and the father was in the state government, and he heard from her what the new paradigm was. Here's a woman who gave a talk. The Charlie heard it. He was a supporter on the left. Her father was on the right. He was a Republican. The other, when it came to the presidential race, And yet they both agreed with it, and then they called Kelso and I to Minneapolis to work with them. They became friends, and when I couldn't get to leaders in the Congress, I called George, and he gave me the name, and before you know it, I was able to get to 3 names, and one of them happened to be a Republican on the Senate Finance Committee, and he became an advocate, and we got the laws. It took a little time, and basically because Russell Long, who was the Democrat senator, headed the Finance Committee. He was first, didn't help at all. That was before he read Kelso's Capitalist Manifesto, which was challenging Marx's view of the world. He read that, and we had a meeting with him, 3-hour meeting, where he picked up the tab, he paid for the meal, and then began to get the ESOP laws passed. And this is just how you do it. This is how you do it. You've got to get leaders who will change the world. And I think Justice University is the key, and all of you are participating in that. And so but you also could have, so the capital ownership account, every citizen would get a grant from the central bank, which they would control, because they would organize with peaceful people power to change the law. It may take 10,000 or 100,000 people coming in on a peaceful demonstration, whatever it's going to take to get the Federal Reserve and to wake up the politicians in Washington. But anyhow, once it's passed, you'd have a grant. Everybody would get an equal allocation of shares. Credit. You would be able to borrow from your local bank. The richest and poorest would get the same amount. What we now have in St. Louis, a Citizens Land Development Co-op, in which the first government in the world was the state of Missouri through Gene Gordon, formed the Descendants of American Slaves for Economic and Social Justice, in which he took things that we wrote on the Citizens Land Development Co-op for East St. Louis, another woman there, and we got it through Illinois. This is before it was done in Missouri, and the law was passed to enable every citizen, every child, woman, and man to be an owner of the land that was owned by the state. And it was for East St. Louis and 20 surrounding communities. And Buckminster Fuller had designed what was called Old Man River City, a dome city, which we were planning to do in Harlem earlier. But we couldn't get money from the Ford Foundation at that time to bring. Kelso and Fuller both had agreed to work with me to form a new Harlem. Well, the unfortunate thing is Wyvetter Young, the political leader in East St. Louis, died after working with us for about eight years. It was. Dawn was able to first meet with her, and then I worked closely with her to develop the law, which Gene has now gotten into. He was able to invite a state senator from the Democrat in Missouri, who will be with us on the event in April 29th in Bridgeport, Connecticut. And so she will be there, the senator, and also where it was signed by a Republican, a very conservative Republican governor. But that was the first government in history to do that. And the next thing will be something we wrote that would recommend that the state would recommend that the federal government pass the Economic Democracy Act. And then the fourth item is for utility. Once you freed up money so that when utilities or energy companies or that which produce natural gas for the home, they have customers. Well, there's no reason that customers wouldn't be able to buy shares in their utility and then have some control and influence over the energy systems. So let's see what we got next. And this is Mike Rainey put together these numbers, and it shows you, if you look at it, you'll see at age 18, the yellow line, at $10,000 a year, if every citizen was able to get that from the time of birth to the time of death, by age 18, they'd have $190,000 in capital ownership, and it would provide them $18,000 of income. And by the time they'd reach 65, they would get much more than me and my wife get from Social Security. At 65, they would have $660,000 worth of assets. That was at 10,000. We were very conservative. It could be 2 or 3 times 10,000 a year. But anyhow, in 65, they'd have $660,000, that person, and have an income of over $88,000 of income, which is twice as much as you could get out of Social Security. And right now, the federal government is trying. There are those in the federal government who want to eliminate Social Security. So this is why what we're talking about is really the answer. It's almost common sense. But that's why we need the people who are students in economic in the economic in the Justice University. We have to begin teaching all over the world. The benefits turn the economy around in terms of distribution of wealth, income, and economic power. You want to have a market economy that would even if 70% or 80% of the wage jobs were eliminated at some point, no problem at all. It may be 80%. So what? If when people's income begins to come from capital ownership, they would be free to do whatever work that they'd love to do. It doesn't matter what, whether it's sports or music or art or politics or education, they would have an income and they would only have to take maybe $1 a year as some of the professors in the leading universities. You'd have a balanced budget in government, which you don't have today, and you'd be able to repay the trillions of dollars of government debt today. And so this closes the income, wealth, and power gap. It would confront, again, systemic racism and inequality. The Abraham Federation is something that we proposed for, what was the country, Dawn?
The Israeli-Palestinian.
Or the Israeli-Palestinian problem. We were recommending that they all form, in Egypt, where we did the first ESOP, in the developing world was in Egypt. And so we said Egypt, Israel, the West Bank, and so on, that they all become members. They're all, whether they're coming from a Jewish or a Christian or a Muslim religious background, they could all come together because this is all consistent with each of those religions. That is no interest credit for capital formation. There, if you go to our quotation section, you'll see the first is from one of the leading scholars, who was in Saudi Arabia, who was in favor of the concept of money without interest, and that's what we're talking about. And so you finance a sustainable development of green technology. I think that's about it. And so let's work together to change the system. Thank you.